Executive Director of Rights and Resources Group, which coordinates the Rights and Resources Initiative. Now the subject here is scaling up support to community forestry as an approach to managing REDD+, lessons from Southeast Asia, is of exceeding importance for several reasons, which I will mention just in a minute or so. Just to give you some bare statistics, that the communities owned and managed approximately 18% of the forest area in the developing countries in 2002. That percentage in 2012 has gone up to 31%. And that's pretty significant. What is also significant is the number of places where the communities are still struggling to assert their rights. The contested claims of the communities in several parts of the world, particularly Africa, and then large parts of Asia and some parts of Latin America, is exceedingly high. It is estimated that if you take the contested areas in forest and the drylands, approximately 2 billion people are still without their secured rights on the land which they have traditionally used as their resource base. That's one side of the story. The second side of the story is that 5 years back, when the research was done as to who is investing in the world's forest, the estimates at that particular point of time showed that communities were investing twice as much as the governments and donors combined on the forestry resources of the world. So that's a very significant statistics in relation to the subject that we are going to discuss, which is REDD+ and the kind of incentives that it offers to the communities. The third aspect, which I think some of our panelists will point out, that given the paucity of the land resources in the world and the simultaneous expansion of the agribusiness, mining, commodity requirements, demand for food, and as well as growing needs for infrastructure, are putting exceedingly high pressure on the same contested areas where the communities have their claims. We have a very eminent set of panelists here, and they will throw much more light on this. But to come back to the subject of the discussion, which is how does this approach of community forestry to managing REDD+ will pan out, we need to also understand it in the context that at the moment there is very low progress in the world in reaching to an international agreement on climate change, and therefore what will be the fate of the worldwide scheme we do not know. We also know that in the past 2 years, the few functional carbon markets have collapsed, the price of carbon has really come down. And therefore, how do we really view the communities who, by the research done in the World Bank itself, have proven to be great conservationists, whether it's the question of species richness, whether it's the question of density, whether it's the question of sustainable values, and therefore that's the aspect which we are going to be investigating today. Now, we have 3 panelists and 1 discussant here. So without taking any more of your time, I request our first panelist, who is Mr. James Brampton, a very good friend of mine, who is the manager of RECOF-TC's Program Coordination and Operations. RECOF-TC, as you know, is Center for People in Forest. It's an international organization that has over 25 years been championing a pro-poor approach to building capacity for community forestry, which is now recognized as a powerful solution for many of the challenges facing the local people and the wider society. James has 18 years of practical forest field experience, much of it working directly with the forest communities in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. I'll now request James to tell us.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. I'm going to talk about why community forestry should be scaled up to help achieve REDD objectives. Well, much paper has been expended, much air perturbed discussing whether and how community forestry can contribute to REDD+. I shall perturb a little more air, but hopefully trying to summarize this for you to demonstrate that, at least from an Asian perspective, all this debate adds up to a strong case for spending more REDD Plus funding on scaling up community forestry. Community forestry is a low-hanging fruit in that nearly every country in South and Southeast Asia have policies and provisions for it. But it has a long way to go before even national targets are achieved, as it is relatively under-resourced and, in polite terms, inadequately incentivized by international development institutions, including the World Bank. As Arvind has told you, I currently work for RECOF, the Centre for People and Forests, which I joined as the Chief Technical Advisor to a World Bank-administered Japan Social Development Fund project for capacity building for sustainable forest and land management in Cambodia 6.5 years ago. Although a less than 4-year project of only $1.8 million, because a programmatic and partnership approach was taken, and because RECOF sought new project funding from various sources to complement and to continue this approach, and because of the efforts of various other development partners working in partnership for the same programmatic outcomes, there are now 457 community forests established, covering more than 400,000 hectares and involving 854 villages, which is around 500,000 people. Now, depending on how forest is defined and the data used, these are debates that you might or might not wish to get into today, this probably makes up somewhere between 3 and 6% of the forest estate in Cambodia, as this map shows. Not much, especially when we consider that only half of this, a little over 200,000 hectares, has full legal recognition, and that the relative security of community forestry agreements, and that the government's own target for community forestry is 2 million hectares. Well, why have I told you about this? Well, partly because it's one of the cases I know best, partly because I did this in partnership with Peter, but also, perhaps surprisingly, Cambodia has one of the most comprehensive community forestry programs in the region. However, when our current funding from the European Union comes to an end in 2015, there is no other funding on the horizon to complete the task at hand. Now, a relatively small investment started something significant, but, as we all know, Rome was not built in a day. Community forestry requires focused and long-term funding over decades. It is not a project for a couple of years in a few places. The investments we are talking about were only a few million a year. But why are development institutions that supposedly support poverty reduction so reticent on accepting this situation? Now, another reason I use the case of Cambodia is because the community forestry program is conserving natural forest better than any other programs for national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, protected forests, and especially the remaining unallocated forests. And all of this in the face of an unprecedented land grab for agro-industrial plantations, mining and infrastructure. Clearly, where forests are protected by communities and not deforested, and they're frequently rehabilitated as well, they are contributing to the overall objective of REDD+. Now note, I am stressing REDD+ as an objective. It's the reduction of emissions from avoided deforestation and forest degradation that is important, not that it's necessarily incentivized by payments from high emission countries. This is what we're trying to avoid. I also note that many developing country governments employ strategies of geographic evasion for many development initiatives instigated from outside, including REDD+. Many Asia-Pacific countries signed up to Millennium Development Goals that were clearly ridiculous. How can a country like Cambodia realistically expect to maintain 60% forest cover? They're forced to fake it. It should not be a surprise to anyone that the royal government of Cambodia has issued concessions on such a vast area of forest land for conversion to agro-industrial plantations, whilst simultaneously pursuing REDD+ and community forestry in other areas. Similar geographies of evasion are occurring in other countries, such as Indonesia and Malaysia, that have significant forest estates. But we should at least grab the opportunities to make community forestry work where it can, and simultaneously pursue strategies such as a rights-based approach to encourage more community forestry where it currently isn't being implemented. We can do this best by demonstrating that it works. Now, most of the community forestry in Cambodia have been established by local communities, not because they're expected to receive REDD Plus payments, but because they use the forest. And this use clearly contributes to their livelihoods in multiple ways. Most local communities appreciate that the forest products and services they value so much can only be sustained if they undertake sustainable forest management, and to do so in a way that is participatory, that supports multiple uses, and that provides benefits equitably to all members. However, this could happen much better if the regulatory frameworks were simplified and made more supportive. Now, these observations that I note for Cambodia are apparent in many other countries in the region. And my fellow panelists from the Philippines and Indonesia will no doubt tell you that this holds true in their countries as well. Now, do you think that the more than 22.3 million people managing more than 1.7 million hectares of forest in Nepal set up their 18,000 odd community forest user groups to conserve carbon? No, of course not. It's in the name, isn't it? User groups. But despite using their forests, are they contributing to REDD Plus objectives? You bet they are. And more communities in Nepal and in other countries are asking for more forest to manage. Now, overall, in the 14 countries in Southeast Asia, from Nepal through China to Papua New Guinea, available data that Arvind was mentioning shows that communities hold statutory rights to 34% of the 534 million hectares. However, as usual, such figures can be misleading if we do not unpack them further. China alone accounts for 109 million hectares. And additionally, Papua New Guinea and India also make up a large part. 87%, in fact, of all the forest land under community tenure in Asia Pacific. There are some other countries that have a long way to go. Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, for example. And we need to move faster than we have in the past. Although impressive in some terms, the fact that the forest land in community possession increased only by 3% between 2002 and 2012 shows just how far we still have to go. Now, analysis shows that countries engaged in REDD Plus readiness activities most commonly prioritise sustainable management of forests, followed by fuel wood efficiency and better enforcement and institutional strengthening, particularly related to slowing rates of illegal logging. A significant number of countries place emphasis on REDD Plus driver interventions appropriate to mosaic landscapes. These include agroforestry, afforestation, reforestation, and assisted natural regeneration. Now, clearly, all of these should lead to community forest management and addressing tenure and rights concerns being the #1 priority for REDD Plus. Now, Profor's recent discussion paper on integrating communities into REDD Plus in Indonesia states that REDD Plus can only be successful in Indonesia if its design effectively considers the central role of communities in the forestry sector and if it addresses underlying community issues. Communities are an essential part of REDD Plus readiness efforts and will also need to have a central role in future REDD Plus implementation. Many of the factors that underlie deforestation in Indonesia also negatively impact local communities, and addressing these factors can have the dual benefit of enabling reductions in deforestation and improving community welfare. Key issues include the lack of clear access rights to forest land, poor spatial planning and poor governance. And again, it's all of these issues that community forestry, if scaled up, can address. And it is precisely for these reasons that the Rights and Resources Initiative is proposing the establishment of an international land and forest tenure facility. So, to summarise, as well as contributing to reducing emissions, carbon financing may provide promising new opportunities for maintaining and even improving the health of the world's forests, and if designed well, for reducing poverty. But if schemes such as REDD Plus fail to deliver tangible benefits to Asia-Pacific's forest-dependent people, then the social and economic impacts could be severe. Ultimately, if carbon financing schemes do not meet the needs and interests of local people, forest-related mitigation efforts will fail. Now, while at long last we have an opportunity to really value forests with their trees still standing, the success of community forestry lies in sustainable use, not in locking away forest resources. Local people hold the key to healthy forests. They have the closest direct stake in forest resources and will affect the outcome of any forest management strategy, including those aimed at climate change mitigation. Benefits from carbon financing must expand rather than replace local people's existing benefits. People should be encouraged to use them. Only if forests are contributing to economic and social goals broader than climate change will they survive. Strong grassroots institutions, clear, secure and strong rights to forests are critical prerequisites. Meaningful local participation, shared decision-making, high levels of transparency and accountability must be regarded as the minimum standard. So I argue that significantly more financial resources are required for scaling up community forestry. Thank you.
Thank you, James. The way organizers have asked me is, unless you have a clarificatory questions, then we can proceed with the presentation and then have a question-answer session later. And therefore, I'm requesting our second panelist, Dinah. She is the coordinator of Debt Watch Indonesia, which supports local organizations that monitor and intervene in the flow of foreign aid, public debt, and by extension, climate finance. She was involved in a detailed study which looked at the situation of women and the patterns of violence they face in the governance of natural resources, including in forest and plantation areas. She is part of the Indonesia Forest Rescue Coalition of indigenous peoples, environmental and human rights organizations in Indonesia that pushed for the adoption, then the extension of a moratorium in the issuance of forest concessions and the adoption of fiscal, social, and environmental safeguard as key components of Indonesia's REDD Plus strategy. She is involved in putting together a collective CSO and IP submission on Indonesia's RPP and forest investment plan. So Diana, your floor is yours.
Oh, that's quite a long one. Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm here in front of you. I'm from Debt Watch Indonesia, yes, and I'm part of the Forest Coalition in Indonesia. Thus, I present this to you today on issues of community forestry in Indonesia. As you all perhaps know, that forest-related issues in Indonesia are plenty. Overlapping concessions, for instance. That's one of the problems. That's why, as the coalition, we also push forward for moratorium of giving concession and reviewing the current concession. Anyway, that's a whole bunch of another discussion. So this is now I'm presenting about the community forestry in Indonesia. So historically, community-based forest management in Indonesia. We know it more being implemented as community forestry or social forestry, a model of forest management that is actually implemented since '78, since the World Forestry Congress, with the forest for people as the theme at that time. Excuse me. And then forestry management, which opened the villagers' participation in the forest management, is seen as the strategic alternative in mitigating various range of forestry problems as tenure, conflict, forest degradation, forest security, poverty, and various other environmental problems. In Indonesia, there are actually several initiatives already on the forestry management program that involve the people since 3 decades ago. Like for instance, hutan kemasyarakatan or community forestry itself. It started since 1995. And then Karangkitri program, that's also since 70s. And then social forestry, developed by our state-owned company, Perhutani, Indonesian Forest Enterprise, since 1980s. And then afterwards, the breakthrough that the government made is from the government regulation, PP number 6 to year 2007. It's about the forest management and the development of the plans on the forest management and its usage. Here are some lists of types of community forestry or forest management based in the community. There are several. This is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 that is here, but there are other stuff also. We have customary forest, we have forest area with special purpose, we have village forest, community forest, social forestry, people's plantation forest, and then partnership, and then joint collaboration in managing conservation area, and then private forest. Most of these, usually community could manage the forest on the state forest. There are several problems that currently we have identified. A lot of problem actually, but the first and all, the first problem is the target from the government is actually not fulfilled. In the strategic planning 2010 to 2014, Forestry Ministry has planned to establish 7.9 million hectares social forestry area, and in which not included the partnership scheme, and has made only 1.2 million hectares. And from the mentioned area, only 50% in the verification process, and only about 131,000 hectares, which is 1.66%, that already given the permit under the from the governors or regions level ever since 2007, ever since the government regulation in 2007. And the decree on village forestry in 2008 was made. This one is from the roadmap forest tenure from our government. This one is target, and on the left side is the scheme, social forestry, village forestry, and then people's plantation forest. The target is fantastic, 2 million hectares, 3 million hectares. But then the area that actually already been given the permit is actually on the right side, on the fourth table. Column. Sorry, pardon my English. We can see the gap actually. This is the achievement from 2010, and not at all. This is 2014, not at all significantly changed, because currently we're still struggling with the one map policy and all. So it's not yet for the community, the place for the community, their permits. It's not at all yet developed. The second one is the legal assurance. All the schemes that I've listed before, maximum they could have only 35 years of use, the land permit, land use permit. So speaking of the sustainability of the community forestry in Indonesia, maximum it will be only like 35 years. let's say if they plant rubber, how long the rubber plantation could produce this, and how long actually the effective or the productive tenure, yeah, that the state could give to the community. So that's the fact of community forestry in Indonesia. And then the third one, our state actually doesn't, Indonesia government doesn't prioritize the community forestry. First, among all of the legal stuff that I've mentioned, there's no regulation that could protect the community to ensure them to have the market access, and they have to highly dependent on the third party. For instance, on the rubber plantation, for instance, Bridgestone could access the rubber plantation, but the community could not set up a price, for instance. They should just surrender or leave it to the market who came to them. So they are very highly dependent on the third party. And then people are being pushed or bumped to the free market without any assistance nor protection from the state. That's the fact. And then currently from the banks, 3 banks, World Bank, and then IFC, and then Asian Development Bank. They're having the joint program in Indonesia named Forest Investment Program. Now, in the document, we can see that FIP identifies community-based forest management as one of their investment area to enhance the opportunity for local communities to participate and surplus. And then CBFM approaches require great effort in capacity building. That's the fact that it requires great effort in capacity building to enable the traditional livelihood of the communities, meet high competitiveness in the global and modern markets, including globalized carbon markets. And then CBFM, the Hutan Tanaman Rakyat and Hutan Rakyat, will be supported through IFC's private sector project. However, financial incentives for sustainable forest management under this project appear to be targeted to large and medium enterprises because according to IFC policy, as far as we know, that they're not actually going to the genuine community forestry. So this is the last conclusion to conclude my presentation today, that actually community forestry seems like a marginal agenda in the negotiation of and then community forestry provides some form of land tenure security for indigenous peoples and communities stayed in the vicinity despite the continuing challenges of forest degradation. And then with or without sufficient financing, community have been able to practice the forest protection, and land tenure security may be okay, but it is not enough. And collective forest tenure is necessary but not enough. There should be inputs to support the state in supporting their community to practice their way in protecting the forest. So this picture is actually one. This is the rare condition where there is an ideal space division between the community, the conservation area, and rubber, and then agroforestry. So on the upland, that's the conservation area, and then in the slope, that's the rubber plantation, and then the paddy field on the bottom part. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, we are continuing with our third and last presentation which will be by Vicky Tolikarpus. She is the founder and director of TEPTEPA, which is Indigenous Peoples International Center for Policy and Education, based in the Cordillera region of Philippines. She is the former chair of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Vicky has actively advocated for the advancement of the indigenous peoples and women's rights. A member of the Philippines government's delegation in the UNFCCC negotiations, Vicky has pushed for the full and effective participation of indigenous peoples, community-based natural resources management, and forest and collective resource rights of indigenous people in relation to forest and REDD+ initiative. She is a member of a tribe, which I can't pronounce, but it's basically Kankana Igorot people. Thank you. Thank you, Vicky.
Thank you very much, Arvind, and thanks to Vic for organizing this meeting. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I wanted to have shown you a map in the Philippines which shows the overlay between the protected areas, the key biodiversity areas, and ancestral domain titles, and the map would actually show that the best protected forest and biodiversity in the Philippines are actually in indigenous people's territories. No, unfortunately, I forgot my USB key. So anyhow, I think some of you have seen this map, and I would like to just say a few points regarding the relationship or the complementarity between community forest management and indigenous and respecting and REDD+ and the role of indigenous peoples' territories and indigenous peoples in ensuring this kind of complementarity. I don't think that it has to be either or, no? I mean, clearly, all these initiatives from the global level that translates down to the national level related to forests, you know, some of them are conflicting, forests and lands in general, no? We find ourselves always in a situation where there are many conflicting laws and policies and programs related to lands and lands in general and forest, and this is really one of the main issues that we need to address when we talk about REDD+ and community forests, no? And if we look at all the different studies that have been done, whether these are studies done by Elinor Ostrom, no, the Nobel Prize winner who has really done a lot of good work on community community governance, she actually concludes that really the areas which are better conserved and preserved are areas where there is really very good community governance, very good community rules that define the boundaries of what the forests are, that define clearly what are the rules that will that has to be put in place, which provides the sanctions. No, if you violate the rules that are established in the communities, and also, of course, very good governance systems in terms of having very clear and simple rules that members of the community should follow, and the capacity to enforce these rules. And then thirdly, of course, the point about ensuring benefits to the communities, and the point of having a very clear monitoring scheme as well, no? Those are some of the elements that they have identified in which these kinds of community forest management systems and community management of lands really succeed, you know. And I've read through a lot of the materials on community forest management, on community, on land tenure, etc. And they always talk about, you know, all this is, but hardly would they mention indigenous peoples, which for me is so ironical. I mean, I simply can't understand why indigenous peoples' customary managements of their forest, their governance over their forest are hardly mentioned in these documents, when in fact, when you look across the board, whether in Asia, Latin America, or Africa, really many of the remaining better controlled forests, better managed forests are really in territories where there are these kinds of community forestry laws or community resource management laws. And I say this because I come from the, the Cordillera region in the Philippines. I belong to the Igorot people. And our community in my town, which is Busao, we have a very strong forest management system called Batangan. And we grew up with that system where the forests are communally owned. It's nobody can own the forest. And even at a young age, we are taught that we cannot be going to the forest or cutting trees indiscriminately. There has to be there are very strict rules. And if you go there and violate these rules, you really undergo a lot of sanctions. You have to pay penalties, you have to go to the community, to the tribal council of elders to ask for permission. And then you have to plant many tree seedlings to replace whatever is it that you cut, which you use not for building a house. If you build a house, it's fine. But if you're going to sell it, that is not allowed. So we grew up with that kind of system. And then for a long time, this system was like regarded as not a very good system. So the government came up with all these schemes. We have the Forestry Code, which was again reformed during the Marcos regime. But basically, the Forestry Code undermines all these very good community and customary forest management systems. In fact, when we have set up a partnership under climate change and forests and indigenous peoples, many of our colleagues, we are doing this in Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, Nepal, Mexico, Peru, and Brazil, and Kenya, and the DRC, and Cameroon. These are the countries that we have partners under this global partnership. Really, one of the key findings that and this has been existing for 4 years, that we discovered is that many of the reason why a community forestry has actually been developed was because of a lot of deforestation that has happened. And in Nepal, for instance, it was only after the government has deforested the forest in Nepal that suddenly community forestry came into the picture, and then they put all the burden of saving or restoring, reforesting this forest into the shoulders of the communities, when in fact it was the government who has really messed it up, of course, and other actors. So the history of community forestry really emerged from that kind of reality, and now we should really think that, after many years of doing community forestry, and now it's successful, Arvind has shown the picture, suddenly REDD comes into the picture. So we get so worried again, oh, what the hell is this REDD again that will come, and of course, because it's initiated from outside, we don't feel like, we really didn't feel comfortable about it, and that's precisely why we put ourselves together, we brought ourselves together to really try to influence the negotiations, because for a long time, a forest was not really very much the center of discussions. It was sort of in the back burner, and then suddenly, because of REDD, forest again became a central issue. But we were so scared because it can re-centralize the management of forests and give it back to the central government, which hasn't done a very good job to begin with. So that was our main fear, and that's precisely why we got so much involved, and until we finally got some of the safeguards in the discussions. But now, a big part of what we are doing in our partnership is really documenting what are the traditional forest management and governance practices and systems that we have in our communities. How are these respected or discriminated against by national laws or policies or programs related to forests, and how do we strengthen our capacity to really even reinforce further these kinds of systems that work, And of course, that it goes without saying that includes, of course, the need to respect and protect the rights and traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples. That's really where all these efforts came from, because of the anxiety that we had when we heard about REDD+. Now, of course, I mean, how many years we were actively engaged in Bali up to now, and you can say that, you know, the sort of, it's a little bit dying down, the enthusiasm, the REDD is not anymore the flavor of the month, but we are not giving up, because we still see that it's really, it can have the potential of further strengthening our own systems, and of course strengthening community forest management systems as well. So in fact, I was glad to see your publication, Ken, that you brought, which is about the Brazilian Amazon experience in relation to community forestry and REDD+. I think that's a good effort on the part of the World Bank to really look at this more deeply and come up with more clear recommendations on what on strengthening the good points of both initiatives. I think both initiatives have their strengths, but they also have their weaknesses. No, and that it's really Diana mentioned about the fact that, for instance, this community forest stewardship program in the Philippines, it's just good for 25 years. And I remember when this came first to us, I said, what the heck, why do you like 25 years? We own our forest in perpetuity. We don't agree that it can only be given to us for 25 years. And then suddenly the government came in organizing community user groups. So in fact, we already have the community, so are there. You know, and so it has created some divisions also within our communities. In fact, in my town, we rejected totally that whole program because we thought that it doesn't respect what we have, and it creates a lot of divisions. There are some elites who suddenly became members of these groups, and they are the ones who are wanting to have a piece of the stewardship contracts and all that, you know. So that, I think, is one of the weaknesses. But of course, through the years, many of these are being rectified. And I think I would just like to really end by saying that I think what we need to do is to really analyze the lessons that we have learned in doing community forestry, use these lessons in further enhancing REDD+, while at the same time recognizing the difference between REDD+ and community forestry. You know, in community forestry, you really have tangible benefits, no? Whether these are non-timber forest products and all that. In REDD+, one of the key things is carbon, which is so intangible and invisible, no? So you didn't really know how to work around it, considering the level of negotiations that have been reached also in the climate change arena. So that's precisely why we have also proposed in the negotiations that the whole issue of non-carbon benefits and multiple functions of forest be discussed and be integrated into the negotiations. Secondly, that there should really be strong monitoring systems that will provide the data that will be the basis for any information that governments submit in terms of how they are respecting the safeguards. And we have pushed for community monitoring and information systems in which we enhance the capacities of our communities to do that. And then thirdly, the non-market approaches. No? These are the three strong proposals that we are lobbying for in the negotiations. And of course, at the core of all those is really for us to get the international community to, number one, recognize the viability and sustainability of our indigenous forest management practices. Number two, to ensure that benefits that will emerge from REDD+ or community forests really are distributed more equitably with the communities. And number three, that the way that we have been managing and looking after our forests should really be a key program supported strongly by REDD initiatives as well as community forest initiatives. And I think we are very focused on doing that, so hopefully we will be able to see some progress as we go. We are not concerned actually that the negotiations in REDD+ are slow, you know, because we feel that, you know, there's still a lot of things that need to be done, and for us to be able to do that, the kinds of studies, analysis, as well as really looking at these viable programs is very much needed. And unless we document, we really strengthen the monitoring capacities of communities, we don't need to have an agreement reached that in the end might be counterproductive for us. So we're not so worried about that. We just want to make sure that governments are going to do the right thing, and that the partnership that we can develop with governments is really going to be fruitful for us, as well as, of course, for the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vicky. That was very, very informative and inspiring as well. Our formal presentations are over, and to kick off our discussion, we have recruited the services of Dr. Peter Zipp, who is the World Bank's Senior Natural Resources Specialist, and has for past 7 years worked in Southeast Asia, before that in South Asia, and now moving on to Latin America. So Peter.
Thank you very much, Arvind, and I want to also thank Vic for organizing this session. I think this has been a very, very useful exchange so far. I'm very much looking forward to the, to the question and answer session that will follow. I'm going to keep my comments short. First, I'd like to acknowledge very explicitly the challenges that I think we faced in the ramping up phase with the REDD program. And there has been, as in almost all of the speakers have mentioned, a very sustained dialogue about what are the problems, what are the gaps in information flow, and how are we going to fill those, and how are we going to address those. And I think that the impression that I have, both from the comments that have been made here and from the experience that I gained in Southeast Asia and in South Asia, not so much on REDD, but on community forestry, that it is an iterative process, and it does require a certain amount of patience, and it does require a very wide open channel of communication between local communities and the bureaucrats at the national level and also at the international level who are working on designing these programs. My sense is that those channels are open and they've been very useful, but there's a long way to go. Still plenty of work ahead of us. I wanted to also sort of frame this a little bit by recognizing that there is a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done at the local level, but in order for that to succeed and be sustained and to be financed, if continuing finance is expected, which I think it is and should be, it needs to be worked on. The enabling framework also needs to be worked on, and a tremendous amount of effort under the REDD program has gone into establishing those platforms for dialogue at the national level and at the international level to ensure that all of the issues are being brought on the table, all of the inherent tensions that exist within the forestry sector are tabled and discussed. Very, very frankly, in my career at the bank, and even before that, the work that I did in forestry in Latin America before joining the bank, I don't think I've ever seen a period of such intense intersectoral dialogue at the national level. REDD has created a platform for different ministries to talk among themselves. It has opened up the door for dialogue with local communities, which is extremely important, but just to have the inherent conflicts in decision making to be put on the table and to be discussed and to be mapped and to look at those overlaps, that has been a huge step forward in the context of REDD. It doesn't get them resolved, it just puts them on the table. It raises people's awareness. The resolution of those overlaps and the conflicts between competing uses are still very much an ongoing effort. But just having a map of the territory is very, very important. I also wanted to talk just a little bit about the opportunity that has been opened up, not just through REDD, but I think facilitated and pushed forward by REDD and FLAG, the Forest Law Enforcement and Governance Initiative, so that we actually have a much more open and frank discussion about the international flows of timber. And this is very, very important, in Southeast Asia, for the work that has been ongoing, for instance, in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Laos. Vietnam is a very major consumer of timber from neighboring countries, and to have a very explicit dialogue about what those flows are and how they're being managed and whether they're being managed effectively or not, it has also, I think, been contributing significantly to this effort. The idea that putting existing, I think I heard this again from several speakers, putting the existing rights, and livelihood, relationships very much up front into the dialogue is absolutely critical. This idea that somehow we're replacing an existing set of rights rather than complementing those rights is front and center. And I see that we create that space structurally in the design of many of the REDD investments. I mean, if you look at how the FCPF, the Forest Carbon Partnership Facility, is supporting a strategic environmental and social assessment, it's exactly designed to bring that dialogue, not just at the national level, but at the subnational level, and to bring voices that would otherwise not necessarily have been part of the policy dialogue into the policy dialogue. And that I think is also incredibly important. Another point that I think I heard specifically from Vicky is the fact that we don't get it right the first time. And I mean, I think it would be unrealistic to expect that you were going to get it right the first time. So there is an iterative process that must be expected. That we're going to learn from the implementation experience, and we're going to refine the policies, the laws, the entitlements. I mean, if I go back, to ancient days when we were working in Andhra Pradesh, we saw that the Andhra Pradesh government revise the entitlement of the communities that were working. This was not strictly community; it was joint forest management in those days. Revised the entitlements that joint forest management communities received 5 times over the space of, I don't know, 7 years or something. They continuously recognized the contributions from the community and increased the entitlements that the communities received from the forest. It would have been nice if they'd gone to 100%, on day one, but it wasn't going to happen. Politically, it wasn't going to happen. So keeping that dialogue going and recognizing that there's always room for expanding entitlements, I think is also very, very important. The other element, which is very much related to that, is that rights are a bundle of rights. I mean, this I have learned from my colleagues at RRI and RECOFT, and we talk a lot about, sort of the geography of rights. When a REDD dialogue is going on, oftentimes it's relatively easy to secure the rights which are closest to home. But because indigenous communities and forest-based communities often have very, very extensive patterns of use, it's very difficult to secure everything through land tenure, and having secure usufruct, secure access to use on a sustainable basis over a much larger area. Just breaking it down, and sort of understanding what are the patterns and how to reinforce that wide range. But it's very encouraging to hear that people are thinking along those lines as well. Just a quick comment about sort of the big picture that is emerging here. That yes, there's been progress. I think RRI has done a yeoman duty in basically trying to document the progress that is occurring. But that is still concentrated in a relatively small number of countries. 87%, I think, was the number that Arvind tossed out, that 87% of the community forestry legally designated in Asia is in India, China, and PNG, right? I mean, we've got to do better than that. I mean, there is a need to really reinforce these rights and to broaden this. And that kind of brings me back to, I think, what's maybe my final point, which is about the sustainability of finance. I mean, the tools that we have at our disposal right now, FCPF, the Carbon Fund, the Forest Investment Program, the ones that were mentioned by speakers here, are very limited in terms of the amount of money that have been put in and the number of countries. I mean, FCPF is a bit broader. What, 30, where are we, Simon? 38 36 countries, yeah, have been brought in. I do believe that the use of those resources also attracts new investments, and so I think that we're expecting, yeah, that there will be top-ups, yeah, to some of these funds as they continue to demonstrate the potential. But I'm also I want to end on on a note of urgency and also encouragement to really move this forward more quickly. I think one of the things that we're recognizing now is that the changes are coming so quickly, yeah, with climate, that forests are a sink, yeah? But if we're not cautious, we may reach some point, yeah, where they become a source, yeah, of carbon. Yeah? The risks of extreme drought leading to either dieback as a result of the stresses the hydrologic stresses that are incurred, or a fire, yeah, they're in the historical record. Yeah, if we go back and look at major dips in the past, spikes in carbon, and we actually find that there is a feedback loop here. We need to be alert to that and really kind of work hard, yeah, to expedite this and scale it up in a time frame that's meaningful, yeah, for protecting forests as well. Okay, I think I'll leave it there. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. That gives us another 20 minutes to ask questions. And I will request that you mention your name, your affiliation, and be brief in asking your questions, as I see already one hand up there, and then I'll come back to you. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Doug Marlin with Pacific Environment, an NGO based in San Francisco that works on the Pacific Rim. Great panel. I learned a lot more than I already knew about community forestry and systems of community forest protection and rules and culture and things like this. My question has to do with some of these, what the REDD project sponsors and others refer to as third-party verification systems for REDD projects. I've had a little bit of distant exposure to the REDD project in Cambodia, the Odarmenche project, which is financed by the U.S. government, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Recently, the Cambodian Daily reported that funds were not trickling to the forestry patrols, that deforestation and encroachment were actually increasing in the area. A short time later, there was another article that talked about the Verified Carbon Standard System, and they issued this project a triple gold climate, not triple bronze or mahogany, triple gold community, climate, and biodiversity accreditation. And the two things seem to be just in direct conflict with each other. I'm wondering, from your experience, do these certification systems, external certification systems that have popped up around REDD, do they help? Do they hurt? Something else altogether? What is your experience with these things? Thank you.
Thank you. What we will do is take the first set of questions and then respond to them. The next question.
Thank you. Daniel Adler from the Compliance Advisor Ombudsman for IFC and MIGA. I've got a question about sort of the politics of engagement around community forestry, and James used the term geographies of evasion, coined I think by Robin Biddulph. And he refers in geographies of evasion to the tendency for these types of internationally driven agendas like REDD to be marginalised when they hit the ground nationally, both in terms of the policy landscape and then spatially when the projects really hit the ground in the communities, and therefore to be pushed into areas where the rights that are being promoted are least relevant to communities. And I get the feeling that across the panel there's a variety of experiences there, some of which might support that hypothesis, some of which might give us insights into how such an agenda can be used in a positive way. But I'd be interested for the panelists, if they have reflections, to talk about the politics of that engagement and how you are able to, more constructively than that hypothesis suggests, develop the political space at a national and subnational level to ensure that these energies are not diverted and captured, but are in fact used productively. Thank you.
Thank you. I can take one more question before we move on to the panelists. Yeah, please.
Actually, it's a very quick question. I'd just be interested in hearing anything that you would describe as a success story in REDD+ with respect to community forestry.
Excellent. I think we have 3 questions. One relates to the third-party verification systems. Second relates to the politics of engagement. And third relates to your question, which is about the success stories at the community level about REDD+. So, James, should I start with you?
Okay. Yeah, okay. The first question about eau de menche, I've been following this project for quite a long time in Cambodia, and right from the beginning we had some concern that it was being set up as a REDD project. The communities have signed up not to commercialize any timber. Nobody did the math to work out what the lost opportunity costs might have been, unfortunately. It's also been so incredibly slow that the money hasn't flowed until I think they just very recently managed to sell at a way lower price than anyone was ever expecting. At the same time, there's a lot of other things going on in Cambodia, and I think the most critical one in that part of the country is that the army is running around because of the border conflict with Thailand, and because they're paid so poorly, they are expected to make their own way, and they usually camp out in the forest, and it's not easy for communities, whether they receive any REDD+ funding or not, to use their patrols against men with guns. So to me, that's been the biggest issue there. Whether it should have received this triple gold award, I don't know enough of the details about how that process was undertaken, but clearly there are some stresses on this. But I think that's one of the problems of project-based REDD+ in these small areas. There's all sorts of issues with leakage and other things. So, perhaps not a success story as we'd like it to be, but it's certainly a fascinating learning ground. So I think it's very important, at least for that. Daniel's question about the politics of evasion, I'd like to say that it is indeed from Robin Biddulph, a paper that he published recently as a hypothesis to help people think about how development is working. And you can find the link to it in the recent Go REDD publication from the UN REDD program. There's another interesting paper on community forestry and REDD+ that they also refer to there. I kind of like it, which is why I've used it, because I do see this happening in reality. And as I said in my presentation earlier, I feel that many governments in the region are going to continue to pursue their economic interests, first and foremost, while at the same time saying, yes, let's see how REDD can develop, and it might be useful in the future, but it will be useful only on a limited geography. So I think people have to be aware that this is going on, that the reality is not exactly what people say, what governments say, but there's a lot of other things going on. In Asia, although I'm not Asian, I think there is a culture of saying what people want to hear. Perhaps the frankness that you're used to in the US isn't quite there. So this is happening. In terms of the success stories, again, I prefer to go back to thinking of community forestry as contributing to REDD+ as an objective. So I don't see any successes in paying and incentivizing reduced emissions through community forestry, but what I see is that community forestry, when it's benefiting people in other ways, it is contributing to the reduced emissions. And I think the example of Nepal in the Middle Hills in particular, clearly shows that community forestry has reforested the hills. Unfortunately, the regulatory environment and the political environment has made it difficult for people to fully realise the potential of the forests that they've now created. So we need to find ways to simplify and transparently enable people to actually start cutting trees down again and making use of them so they value their forests even more.
Thank you, James. Vicky,
yeah. Thank you. I'll just respond to the questions in taking together all the three questions. First, I think about the politics. How are we in the politics of engagement? No, you know, when those of us in the partnership decided to really fully engage with REDD+, it was a very conscious decision, in spite of the fact that there is a very strong push for no REDD, you know, all these kinds of things. We consciously decided to go into it because we saw an opportunity which will really raise higher the profile of how indigenous peoples have been protecting their forests and the need to really have the issue of rights to lands, territories, and resources into the center of the discussion. That was really how we are very pragmatic when we decided to play that role. And I think 4 years after we have done that, we have seen really a lot of progress in terms of our own partners being actively engaged at the national level. They are now members of national REDD and climate change formations. Secondly, they take part in all the global negotiations, and they really are playing a lead role in organizing the Indigenous Peoples Caucus. And they are actively engaged in setting up doing that research and local advocacy, not just at the national level, but also at the local level, looking at what are the ordinances that are being made at the local level, and how does this respect or reinforce the traditional forest management practices and laws and customary governance systems of indigenous people. So I think we use it very significantly. Of course, our partners also file cases, you know, like for instance our AMAN, you know, which is one of those involved in filing the case before the Constitutional Court on the ownership of forests by the customary communities, you know, and I think, you know, these are really success, at least from our point of view. We may not get the REDD in place yet because it's not really fully implemented anyhow. We're still in the readiness phase. You know, I think that's something that we need to demystify as well. We're not even in full implementation yet of REDD. It's just the readiness phase. But for us, we did get a lot of mileage in terms of strengthening our own communities and really making our own communities assert more strongly their rights and their knowledge to this forest. And then the second point I want to raise is in relation to this third-party verification. No, I mean, that's why precisely we have this. I would like to show this again. We are now doing a very extensive work on developing community monitoring and information systems, because we think that, you know, all these verifiers or consultants who are flying in, you know, you will be shocked. I was so shocked the first time I went to the climate change negotiations. I saw all these people whom I never met in my life. Then slowly I realized they're all consultants who have all these high-tech presentations. In fact, they call me and would like to show me how to do carbon monitoring, etc. So I said, you know, I mean, that's the kind of challenge that we face. But I think if we strengthen the communities, they can really provide all this information, and there are really proof that will show that we can do it. And I think that's one of the things we want to achieve.
Thank you, Vicky. We have been told by the organizers that we have at the most 5 minutes left. So you would like to respond? I'll give you 1 minute. Yep.
We started actually.
Yeah, I know. But somebody showed me the paper.
Yeah. And then, okay. First of all, about the politics of engagement. Well, as Vicky rightly said, even at the readiness phase, we're not ready yet. I mean, really, like related to the community forest question, even how can we highlight here to say that there is a success story on the context of REDD, because it's It's not yet there. We're still struggling for the indigenous peoples to define how actually they could have the full rights on their own land and not as the guest of their own land. Let me just, I don't know if this could give you all of us here a bit of description that for a community to define that this area is theirs, they need to have 32 steps of procedure in a procedure to just to have one piece of paper that say that this is our area.
Yeah.
So I hope that certification, I hope this could answer the certification thing as well.
Thank you. 10 more minutes. Yeah. We could take a couple of quick questions, if there are. Yep. Josh.
Hi, Josh from BIC. Thank you all for the great presentations. I've learned a lot too. This has been very helpful. I'm wondering, among all of the kinds of things that you describe about the work that still needs to be done, what do you think are the priorities for folks like the World Bank or the FCPF or the FIP? What are the 2 or 3 things, most important things that you think they can contribute? Thanks.
Thank you. Yes, and that will be the last question. Okay.
Hi, my name is Ali.
You please use the mic and tell your name and affiliation.
Can you hear me? My name is Ali Silverman. I'm from the Center for International Environmental Law, and I just wanted to hear more. Vicki started talking about it, but from the other panelists about how you can use community forestry to develop other access rights. So we've talked a lot about land tenure, but there are a lot of human rights and environmental rights that are clearly stated, and land tenure is a little difficult to determine, but there are other rights that are already established in international law, and I want to see how community forestry can play a role in asserting those as well.
Thank you. I think these are very specific questions and we can be quick in answering them. One, of course, Josh is asking what are the priorities for institutions like World Bank and others. And she's asking how does the community forestry actually engages in a manner that the other rights are recognized. So Vicky, should we start with you?
Well, priorities for the World Bank. I think, you know, the World Bank, the FCPF, and even the FIP now, they have allocated some small amount of money for capacity building, no, for indigenous peoples and local communities. I think that's a very good move because, and clearly when we talk about the terms of reference, it is us who will determine how that will be used. There will be no conditionalities whatsoever. So even and Tubtuba is the regional intermediary for Asia. So we have been having discussions with our Asian indigenous friends, and we have decided that really a part of we look at that the capacity building needs, and these are tremendous. And the money is nothing, you know, it's very small actually. So maybe the priority is for the World Bank to, if the World Bank believes that successful REDD or community forest management means strengthening the capacities of those who have shown that they can protect and really save the forest and contribute to mitigation, then by all means I would recommend that you really enhance further those amounts of money, but really do it jointly with indigenous peoples and not just to government. No, I think that problem always arises when everything goes to government, and of course, you know, I mean that power inequality between government and indigenous peoples will be further enhanced. And then secondly, the question about other rights. No, I mean that's precisely why they mentioned the bundle of rights. No, that we have access rights, we have use of rights, we have of course the whole issue of rights to ensure that the other environmental services, for instance, from forests are really ensured, whether this is right to water, you know, as well as your right to participate. That is really a basic, the most basic right that we would like to push for, and that's precisely why we are creating these systems where indigenous peoples can have that possibility to participate and to really design and shape the final shape of all these programs related to forests and lands.
Thanks, Vicky. James, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I don't have much more to add, but just maybe one of the things that the bank can assist in is to make sure that community forestry is a central part of government's national programs for REDD Plus or just for forestry in general. Take the example of Laos, where the FLIP is about to take off. But it is very much focusing on the production forests because the Lao government considers the forest for the national community rather than the individual communities that live there. So I think there is a component that looks at village forestry, as they call it in Laos, but there could have been perhaps a greater emphasis. Not easy with the Lao government, I appreciate this, but it's something that the World Bank needs to just keep hammering at, and maybe we can get some leverage there. Otherwise, I'd like to endorse what Vicky has said.
Thank you. Since Diana says that she will yield to you, we'll give you another minute.
Yes, sorry. Thank you, Diana. Well, I just wanted to add that actually one of the things that we would really like the World Bank to get more engaged with is really helping us develop and elaborate further what are non-carbon benefits and non-market approaches. You know, I know that the bank is mainly there to promote the market approaches. You know, but I think, you know, I mean, if I look at your new strategy and all that, you really have the opportunity to be able to really look more widely into what are these other approaches being pushed by civil society and indigenous peoples communities. And these are approaches that I think haven't been explored more deeply, and we really need to help each other to bring out exactly what are these and what are the mechanisms that need to be put in place so that all this will be part of the whole implementation of REDD when it's going to be really into full-scale implementation. So I think that's another suggestion that we have.
All right, we are almost coming to the close, and I would actually like to answer one question, which is about the success story itself. Now, just sheer statutory recognition of the community's struggles and therefore their rights on the forest and land resources now total more than 430 million hectares, indigenous territories and community forestry rights. By all accounts, including the research done by eminent scholars in the World Bank like Ken Jobins, they are very species-rich forests. They are the ones which are best conserved forests. They are the ones which provide the sustainable livelihoods to the people. We are very soon going to calculate how much carbon that 435 million hectares already contains. And that's exactly what REDD Plus objective is, not the scheme. The differentiation, James, which we have been making, is of extreme significance. That if you look at the objectives of the REDD, which is to conserve the forest, so that the carbon is stored there, it should always be a byproduct. Look at this entire, that's the biggest effort that I can think of anywhere in the world for the conservation of carbon, which is 435 million hectares conserved in the community forestry and indigenous territories. Now that's exactly the picture which we need to look at. On the flip side, if we look at, granted, all these are iterative process, we are at the beginning, we are at this thing, but the direction of the investment is absolutely wrong. How much money, whether it's under FCPF, UN, REDD, FIP and other things, has really gone to the communities? And that's the subject which I want to bring back the focus of attention at the end of the day. It has gone for MRV, it has gone to consultants, it has gone to, creating platforms and other things. 0%. All of the RPPs, if you analyze, about 67% of them say that the tenure is one of the major obstacles. The rights of the communities, of the IPs, not being recognized as major obstacle, but the investment on them is less. And therefore, to me, it's not the Norwegians alone, it's not the UNFCCC alone, but everybody got to invest in the communities, because that's the only successful example which we have on today's date. Thank you very much, and thank you, Vic, for organizing this.
Okay. Great. Peter, I want to give you also a copy. monitoring.
Big Nick. But good, now I know much more.